We are very soon launching this event. Apologies. Here we are. Excellencies, dear colleagues, good afternoon to who is with us at Palais des Nations. And good morning, good afternoon, or good evening to who is with us on WebEx or is now watching the recording of this event. The Geneva Environment Network and the International Union for Conservation of Nature, or IUCN, have the pleasure to welcome you today at the Palais des Nations and virtually for the event Innovating and Unlocking Finance for Nature-Based Solutions. This event is organized with the support of NetworkNature and the European Union Commission, and builds also on the outcomes of a series of sessions that we have organized with IUCN in 2021, with the aim to facilitate further engagement and discussion among the stakeholders in international Geneva and beyond on nature-based solutions in the lead up to some critical negotiations. This led, among other milestones, to the adoption of a resolution at the United Nations Environment Assembly last year, defining the concept of nature-based solution. And of course, it builds also on the 2 days of workshop that some of you here had with our colleagues of IUCN. Before I hand over to Veronica Ruiz, who is a Resilience Program Manager at IUCN, and who will be moderating this session, and there have been some last-minute changes, and Veronica might explain you why. I would just remind everybody that the documents presented, the summary, as well as the video of the event, will be made available on the webpage of this event. The link is being shared in the chat for who is online, or will be available in the screen. Throughout the event, you can raise your questions by using the Q&A box. We have a dedicated session to answer these after the presentations. Of course, who is in the room will raise their hand, ask for the floor. Finally, let me also remind for who is online that the transcription is available at the bottom left of your screen. You can have a look at the current slide, which shows where to automate the transcript in 100 languages. So that's only available for who is joining us online. So with that, Veronica, over to you.
Thank you, Diana, for the introduction. And first of all, I would like to send the apologies and regrets of our colleague Sigvard McGuinness, our IUCN Deputy Director General for Program, who is unfortunately sick, so he cannot join us. And we will have our colleague Chris Vassos, I will present later on with in the session, and myself personally also having the chance to moderate these events. Before going into the details of the session, I would like just to give a little bit of background and why are we here today. So today we are here within the framework of the NetworkNature project. This is one of the projects which is really encompassing all the nature-based solutions funded project by the European Commission. We are more than 40 projects, and we believe that we will go only even beyond of that 40 projects. So we have been the last 2 days, not far from Geneva. We have been in Global for the last 2 days talking about nature-based solutions, what is the power that hasn't been yet unlocked for nature-based solutions for financing and investment. And now here we are with all of you closing these 2 days, and we hope then you can enjoy as well a little moment in the recession where we can keep discussing about this power of nature-based solutions. And why nature-based solutions? You know, nowadays we are facing this triple planetary crisis. We are talking climate, which we believe like everybody is aware about climate, but also it's about biodiversity and also about pollution. And all of this also links with with people. We cannot forget that nature and people go hand by hand. So nature-based solutions has a very impact and can be a very impactful strategy to confront these 3 planetary crises in a jointly manner. So while we, of course, we are trying to contribute to achieve the challenges of this planetary crisis, we also try with nature, through nature-based solutions, to promote sustainable development, but of course to generate financial, social, and investment returns. We believe this is very important, but despite this, nature-based solutions face multiple difficulties nowadays. We know that it is a gap of knowledge. We have been discussing this the last 2 days. We are still not joining much forces into really moving forward on how we work together to face those challenges, but also difficulties in implementation with a clear lack of financing as a critical obstacle. So unlocking investment to close the gap will require investors for sure, funding bodies, we need government, but we need diverse pools of actors to come together. And just to give you a hint of where we are on investment, and then colleagues from UNEP will go much more into detail. Nowadays, the G20 economies, which include the European Union plus the 19 largest economies in the world, that are investing 120 billion per year on nature-based solutions. But there is a need to triple this investment. We are still still there is a gap to be filled to fill the 384 billions by year that are necessary by 2025. And for what we need that huge amount of investment to contribute to climate, biodiversity, but also to degradation goals. We really need to speed up the investment, and this is why today we will have this discussion across colleagues to talk a bit more on this. So I would like first of all to introduce the panelists. I'm very lucky to share the table with all of you. So we have Guy Hudson, who is the Senior Advisor for Innovation, Finance, and Advisory for the European Investment Bank. Here we have Karin Songberger, and she's the Policy Officer for the European Commission. Then colleague Liesel van Haast, she's the Deputy Head at UNEP Finance Initiative. She will be driving us through these numbers. And then also we have Fiona Frick, she's the Managing Partner for SIRS Invest. And finally, my colleague Chris Bass, who is the Director for the IUCN Center for Finance and Economy. So I would like to move into really the panel, and I would like to give the floor first to Guy, which will give us a hint of what are the key findings from the upcoming report that the IIB has been working on investing in nature-based solutions, state of play and way forward for public and private financial measures in Europe. So the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Veronica, for that wonderful introduction. It's a pleasure to be here and to be in such great company. My name is Guy Hudson. I'm an advisor in the Advisory Services Department at the EIB, the European Investment Bank, headquartered in Luxembourg, focusing on innovation. Our shareholders are the 27 member states of the European Union, and we work very narrowly with the European Commission across a number of topics, emerging sectors and innovation. I'm here today to really talk about a forthcoming report that we prepared in collaboration with DG Research and Innovation of the European Commission. And specifically, we were tasked as advisory services to look at the challenges and the opportunities on investing in nature-based solutions. So very much to look at it as financiers, as bankers. Obviously, we do not formulate policy, we are receivers of policy, but we are experts in financial instruments. So the report itself had a number of key components. And the first one was really to conduct a deep dive into the existing nature-based solutions actually in place, up and running, if you will, in the European Union. The focus was the European Union, but we recognize that it's a global issue. NBS is a global trend, and that many of the biggest examples are actually located outside the European Union. But our task was to look at the issues with developing NBS and ultimately seeing what we could do to scale it up. So this deep dive actually allowed us to compile a list of nearly 1,400 nature-based solutions actually active in the European Union. We believe, whilst acknowledging there are very major data gaps, and it's something that we keep coming back to in this theme, but there were major data gaps, so we acknowledge this 1,400 won't capture everything, but we reckon it's the most serious attempt at drawing up the long list, if you will, of NBS in Europe. Now, our first finding was actually that 3/4 of these projects were actually in the urban ecosystem. We actually divided our study into a number of ecosystems: urban, forest, agriculture, river lakes, inland wetland, and marine and coastal ecosystem. So 3/4 of these 1,400 were essentially urban NBS. Behind that, the forestry sector and then the agricultural sector were, most prominent. The second component we actually did was actually to do an assessment of the potential for nature-based solutions across all these ecosystems. So getting a sense that, what is the financing gap? How much could be deployed in this space? All other things being equal, and it shouldn't come as a surprise that for full restoration across these ecosystems, there is a very large amount of headroom for doing more. The third component, so building on that database, actually we went through 28 databases and through the key EU instruments, so Horizon 2020 and the LIFE programme, to find this database of projects. We then supplemented it with actually a fairly deep market survey of financial sector experts, and really asking them key questions about natural capital and nature-based solutions. We sent out 200 questionnaires. We actually got 110 responses and conducted 58 interviews with banks, insurers, asset managers, private equity / financial investors, and really asked them the key questions. How are you looking at the sector? What's the opportunity? What are your challenges? How are you trying to grapple with this natural capital asset class, which in a sense is coming on top of the climate agenda? Now, one of the key findings, unsurprisingly to the people in the room online, is that NBS funding is still dominated by public sources of grant funding. Within the EU, over 60% of the funding is actually derived from EU programmes. I mentioned Horizon 2020 and the LIFE programmes, which I estimate between 200 and 250 million euros in the last programming period. Of the private sector itself was only responsible for 3% of NBS, where it was the majority source of financing for the projects. Now, obviously, it begs the question, why so low? And this is what we spent 2 days talking about in great detail. So that was the more desk-based and survey-based part of the report. When it comes out, you'll see the details. But the other component is, back in 2014, the European Commission actually asked the bank to, co-developed and asked the bank to implement the natural capital financing facility, which was a 15 million euro investment facility with a 10 million euro technical assistance or support facility. And this was a pilot program really intended as the proof of concept, but really crucially a market-based instrument. So the philosophy was repay for finance. By extending finance, you expect to get paid back rather than pure grant funding, which other programs provided. And so over the last 8 years, we've kind of learned a lot about the natural capital market in Europe. We could deploy debt instruments, equity instruments, there was technical assistance, and over those 8 years, the teams received over 100 projects, and in the end signed 11 projects, so financing operations, totaling about 80 million euros. I think it's reflective of how the biodiversity agenda has just grown in visibility over that period, by the fact that deployment was much higher towards the end of that period. Now, it also reflects, the raised profile of nature-based solutions and biodiversity restoration over the past 5 years. That, under the European Green Deal, which also has driven the EIB's own climate bank roadmap and climate adaptation plan, these things have been bubbling up together. So there are many lessons as a financier from the natural capital financing facilities that are now relevant to the broader NBS market. It's important to note that actually one of the major key lessons was that the average project size encountered was very small. And this is a real operational challenge for the finance sector, where most projects under 10 million euros represent, quite a challenge. It's quite inefficient for financial investors to engage in lots of small, non-replicable projects. So the average project size was under 2 million euros, and 44%, so not far off half, were under 1 million euros. Okay, we've spent 2 days. We've spent 2 days talking about the market failures, the structural barriers. I think the climate change agenda does provide, a real opportunity for the natural capital concept to gain ground. There are policy underpinnings on which we can build more robust business models. I think in terms of what, now skipping over what is quite a large report, but ultimately our conclusion maybe from the NCFF is that there's a continued need for a continual spectrum of policy-based financial instruments, all the way from seed stage, investment capital, seed technical assistance, early growth capital, and flexible debt instruments for innovative aggregators of projects. I've highlighted that small-scale projects are difficult. There's a need for aggregation, and for institutions, hopefully being able to mainstream natural capital and MBS into larger investment programs with promoters who are good at putting projects together, have experience of it, and that have nature close to their business models. And crucially, now the grants will continue to be essential in this space. And so streamlined coordination with EU and national grants combined with financial instruments are going to continue to be very, very important. And thank you for listening to that.
Thank you so much, Guy. We could go hours speaking into this. It's a very interesting topic. And I would like to emphasize 2 points you mentioned about the importance of mainstreaming nature-based solutions into larger scale type of investment, but also in bringing nature itself into business models. And also, you mentioned only 3% of the private investment goes into comes from the private sector. So why is so low? So action is needed. We need action, and it's very decisive for this decade. So I will hand it over to you, Karen, with a lot of experience in negotiating how to bring nature-based solutions and mainstreaming them.
Thank you, Veronica, and thank you to the organizers for inviting me on this panel. I'm working for the European Commission and DG Environment at the international unit, and I'm following nature-based solutions in the frame of the Convention on Biological Diversity and UNEA. As we heard, science is clear. We are in a planetary emergency that's caused by interdependent triple emergency of climate change, biodiversity loss, and pollution. Action during this decade will be decisive. Each year, each choice, each decimal degree of warming matters. Nature-based solutions, as we heard, deliver multi-benefits for nature, people, and climate, and nature-based solutions are ready for use and easily accessible. In 2019, the European Union launched the European Green Deal, a holistic roadmap for a just transition, leaving no one behind, following a do-no-harm principle. Since then, several initiatives, legal acts, strategies, and action plans have been adopted, including the Biodiversity Strategy for 2030 and its urban greening plans, and the proposed nature law for nature restoration law, a revised adaptation strategy, zero pollution and circular economy action plans, farm to fork strategy, a renovation wave, and the European Bauhaus initiative. Nature-based solutions are to a larger and lesser extent embedded in all these initiatives. This means implementing nature-based solutions contributes to their objectives. These policies also open opportunities for nature-based enterprises, which open new markets. The EU is a member of the ENAC Partnership for Nature-Based Solutions that was launched last year at COP27, which we think is a key to accelerate and strengthen implementation, a space where the many existing initiatives can join forces to increase their visibility, exchange experience, and above all, to encourage public and private investors to get involved. Several of the funding instruments can already be used for implementing nature-based solutions. As we heard yesterday and also by Guy, Several hundreds of millions of euros of the EU's research programs Horizon 2020 and Horizon Europe have already been invested in the development and demonstration of nature-based solutions, which has made a significant contribution to increase our knowledge. And we are continuing to do so. Biodiversity, the European Partnership on Biodiversity, is currently preparing a call for proposals on nature-based solutions. Dedicated to nature-based solutions, we hope many exciting projects will be proposed under this call. So the concept of working with nature rather than against it has been around for quite some time. There are several terms which have been developed and used in different sectors and policy areas, for example, green and blue infrastructure, ecosystem-based adaptation, ecosystem-based disaster risk reduction, natural water retention measures, ecological infrastructure, ecosystem infrastructure. And I'm kind of sure we will continue creating terms. But the concept working with nature is going throughout all these concepts, which share the same rationale that healthy ecosystems deliver the crucial ecosystem services on which our societies and economies depend. Hence, we need to protect, restore, and use and manage ecosystems sustainably. In other words, the implementation of nature-based solutions is crucial for our societies and economies. The implementation of nature-based solutions is labor-intensive and needs many hands and skills. However, this labor intensity is still too often considered as a high cost. However, considering that people need up and foremost a decent work to ensure decent living, the business and job opportunities which are created through the implementation of nature-based solutions should be considered as a key asset. Through implementation of nature-based solutions on all levels, people become a part of the solution. It gives a sense of hope and purpose. In fact, for the implementation of nature-based solutions, people concerned must be involved. We need participatory approaches from early on throughout the whole implementation process. Implementation nature-based solution means working with nature, with people, for nature, for people. So in doing so, the implementation of nature-based solution fosters the needed transformative change. There's many entry points. There are several reasons to protect or restore mangrove forest, for example. It can be restored for nature to provide habitat. It can be restored for people to provide protection against storm surges, or it can be restored for climate as a carbon sink. This makes the nature-based solutions implementation de facto mainstreaming biodiversity in different sectors. And regardless of what was the initiating intention, the other benefits are delivered as well. So, but of course, implementation needs investment, and that's what we have been discussing for the last 2 days. Humanity's current operational system is the neoclassical economic system driven above all by financial return on investment, which does not appreciate the merits of benefits which are not costed. The IPBES global assessment has already pointed out that we need to move away from the narrow growth paradigm. So perhaps maybe rather than using traditional cost-benefit elements, maybe we could see investment in nature-based solutions as investment to address the planetary emergency, investment in our common future, investment in safeguarding our common home. The COVID pandemic has shown what humanity is capable of when it recognizes a life-threatening risk. Climate change, biodiversity loss, and pollution are an existential threat, and still our joint reaction is not commensurate to the challenge, and we are running out of time. Hence, it is very important that we are working to capture nature-based values to make them bankable. But at the same time, we also need to strive for a sustainable economy where people's health, well-being, and livelihoods, protection and restoration of ecosystems is at the heart and center. In other words, an economy, a just transition, leaving no one behind, doing no harm. However, of course, let's not forget nature-based solutions are not a panacea. We need to accelerate the implementation of technological and nature-based and societal solutions. To use the words of the UN Secretary General on the occasion of the launch of the IPCC 6 Synthesis Report, we need everything, everywhere, all at once. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Karin. On time. And I could not agree more with you when you mentioned the importance of embedding nature-based solutions into policy, because indeed it helps in fostering, first of all, opening new markets, diversifying markets, but also contributing to generating job opportunities. But job not jobs, but decent works. And this is also maybe to flag. And it was part of the event that happened last week, also with the Geneva Environment Network coordinating on it. The report that was released in November as part of the COP27 and also part of the COP15 CBD, and is a report elaborated by UNEP, Yellow, and IUCN on nature-based solutions and job generation. But we keep here listening. This keyword is investment, 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 market, and diversifying markets. So I will hand it to you, Fiona, to give us a little bit more insight of what is the role here of, let's say, the private sector.
Okay, so I have a presentation. I hope it's there, but if not, I can do without it. So I'm a managing partner at Circe Invest. After being CEO and asset manager for 30 years and giving advice to institutional clients about how to manage their money, I decided to launch my own firm. And the goal of the firm is really to help institutional clients to allocate between their fiduciary duty and sustainability, because these two, unfortunately today, to come back on the comment on the old economical model, fiduciary duty of asset manager and investors is still very framed in regulation. And I'll go back there. So I'm the messenger of the financial sector, and what I'll give you is my genuine opinion on what can be done to increase impact and the flows toward nature-based solutions. So what are asset managers and what are consultants? In fact, they are just there to permit flows to go from investors, which are generally retail investors or institutional clients, to project companies or government. So we are really a facilitator, and the responsibility we have is, as we are a facilitator of flow, is how can we make flow go in the right direction, meaning favoring sustainability rather than go in the wrong direction, which is favoring old technology or industries which are not beneficial really for the environment and the society. So, purpose of asset managers, the purpose of investors. I was discussing about fiduciary duty. One of the important things to understand is that when you speak with a CIO of an institutional, and I'll speak mainly for institutional clients, which are pension funds, insurance companies, sovereign wealth funds, because these are the clients I know. I don't know so much about retail clients. But when you speak with the CIO of a pension fund or an insurance, he will tell you he has a fiduciary duty, which is already a social goal, which is to make people age graciously and to help people retire with a certain sum of money. So they have a social purpose, which is this. And this is really what is ingrained in the law of fiduciary duty, because at the end, the fiduciary duty of an investor in regards to his pensioners or insurer clients is to give the best risk-return adjusted performance, meaning that your investor has a certain level of risk. What is the best return you can give for that level of risk? So everything which goes after this first bolt, when you see this nice little bird, is capable of being done only if it doesn't break the first law, which is helping investors invest in a way which is a risk-adjusted performance, which is maximizing risk-adjusted performance. So these things, the things which goes after, which is financing the long-term needs of the economy, influencing company who invests, etc., is only once we have done this fiduciary duty. So there is two ways there how asset managers can influence: is make this fiduciary duty evolve and make sure that investor responsibility doesn't go only to the clients they serve, but has a larger definition in terms of stakeholder, which is planet and society. Or another thing which is also very useful is asset managers are there today the main owners, and institutional asset managers are the main owners of company today, because they are owners of company, there is more and more regulation that force them to vote and engage with these companies and engage and vote on this company more and more on sustainable issues. So asset managers have really two goals. One is make sure that most capital go to sustainability. And second, engage with companies, the Nestle, the Danone, Exxon of this world, to make sure that they measure their economic, the biodiversity impact, their climate impact, etc., and then compensate for that. And I think the two rules are very important. The good news is that nobody today in the business sector disagree with the fact that climate and biodiversity loss are the most precious risk for our society. This has been said at the World Wealth this year. You can see that are the biggest risks which have been quoted by the WWF. The four first ones are linked to climate or biodiversity. Everybody is aware that this is systemic risk, meaning that if climate and biodiversity gets completely deregulated, there is no more economy and there is no more society. So I think at this point, the good news is everybody has understood that everything has to be done to avoid that risk. That goes back on what I said, but as of today, money going to sustainable strategies go mainly in regards to the two parameters, which is in the financial fiduciary duty, which is risk and return. And mainly, as I said, as it is considered as a risk, many investors will go to how to mitigate that risk. What is important today also is how to get more money in impact, meaning that money that has a positive impact on nature and climate, but not only investing in strategies that avoid climate risk or avoid biodiversity. We need obviously risk management, but also how to have more projects which finance positive outcomes, not just avoiding negative outcomes. So as I see, sustainability investment has been going up. This is a good news, etc., etc. But sustainability investment has been grown mainly by exclusion for the moment and best in class. What is exclusion? Means that if you think a company is damaging environmental and social criteria, you just exclude it. You exclude, obviously, for example, coal mining companies, etc. But the problem is that by exclusion, you don't solve anything, because at the end, what you exclude from your portfolio, capital markets are so large today, somebody else will buy it, and the result is no. Best in class is a bit better. You invest in companies that you think are a bit better than others. And the good news is that asset managers and investors can do their fiduciary duty of engaging with the company and voting. And I think that's where also it's really important to focus on that, because asset managers and investors has more and more pressure point on companies to, through asset general assembly, through voting, etc., to push the sustainable agenda forward in the private sectors. The part that needs to grow really is on the top, is the impact. And you see impact is still very, very small in the bucket of what is called sustainability. Why? Because it is associated, and truly it's normal, with higher risk. And it's generally illiquid, so it goes into private equity fund or venture capital fund. So it's really a small allocation of institutional client today. So how could we make sustainable product, positive sustainable product, be something more than just impact? Because impact today is mainly venture capital and private equity. So how can we mainstream impact toward other asset class? What do investors want from impact investing? This is really important. So they want the opportunity. And that's the thing which is very clear about climate. There is this new technology, etc. So they see the opportunity, this industrial revolution coming, companies having to transform themselves. There will be leaders, there will be laggers. So there is an opportunity to perform. Obviously, that is the first thing investors will be looking for. So they're looking for the investment shift. They want impact and return. And it's important, going back to the definition of fiduciary duty, they are not allowed regulatory, and you see now all the discussion that there are in the US regarding that, company asset managers which are attacked because they are seen as not doing their fiduciary duty. So they need impact, but also return. They want demonstrable impact, and this is becoming more and more clear also with the European regulation, so they need KPI that they can measure. And they want to know, look, for example, I have been investment manager for the last 32 years, frankly, 10 years ago, I didn't know what was a scope 1, scope 2, scope 3. Neither did I know what was a PDF for biodiversity. So we have to learn, we all have to become scientists. And that's the why we want to invest in this kind of project, because we have to learn this new way of measuring. And I totally agree that the definition of GDP is an old definition, and that wealth and growth will be measured in the future with also nature capital and human capital implied in it. So we need to speak this new language to be able to invest accordingly. I think what is missing today is data on biodiversity, which are simple. And for us, if it took me perhaps 3-4 years to understand scope 1, scope 2, scope 3, GHG emission, temperature alignment, etc., well, biodiversity is another step forward, and it's not the fault of biodiversity. Biodiversity is much more complex, it's much more local, and it's difficult to have one number which grasps the overall thing. And I think that's where we will need to progress. Also, what is missing today is that if, as an investment manager, I want to engage with companies, public companies, there is not a lot of data which are reported at the level of public companies in regards to biodiversity. And for example, CDP data, we look at 2021, there were nearly 1,900 companies reporting on climate, to only 4,000 reporting on biodiversity. So when you look at the reports of public companies, when they speak about biodiversity, it's a lot about narrative. It's about, okay, we financed a farm in Costa Rica, and the farmers are proposing growing sustainable coffee or whatever, etc. But you don't find today yet in balance sheet of a company or in extra financial data a measure of what is the carbon footprint negative of whatever company in the world. And so it's nice to see all this narrative about the project they finance, but how do we put in relationship the project they finance with the damage they are causing? And I think that's where TNFD will be really helpful, because if TNFD can do what TCFD has done, then all companies will be obliged to report on this biodiversity data. And the beauty is when these companies report on biodiversity data, then they'll need to offset. And when they need to offset, they'll go to nature-based solution. Here is, I think, my last slide. What are the products which are today bought by investors? You can see that in terms of nature-based solution, it's mainly debt, which is currently raised by investors because it has a nice risk return, quantifiable cash flow, etc., etc. So I think, how can we build product that goes beyond that map? And that's it for me.
Thank you so much for your intervention. I find like coming from IUCN, no, conservation-oriented organization, and sometimes we can be lost in translation by using different narratives. But at the end of the day, we are looking at the same but from different angles. So I think it's very important. Maybe one of the next steps that we need to find like the common ground. Like, what are we talking about? That for that is very important that all different actors will come together. We have these dialogues and we see like how best to move forward. But it really, like, I would like to really emphasize, I think something that in narrative that is coming very recurrently is about the risk, high risk of course of lack of regulation in terms of climate, regulation in terms of biodiversity, but also the risk of greenwashing, which is coming more and more, and see like how we are going in some cases, unfortunately, into by greenwashing. But this is a matter because we are moving maybe so fast, and we are moving so strongly in looking for impact and returns, and in terms of nature-based solutions, sometimes it can be can happen in a longer term. We are not looking for returns which are happening just tomorrow, but we need to wait a bit more of time, right? So talking about greenwashing, returns, and common ground, I would like to hand over to my colleague Chris Bass, who can talk a little bit more on what IUCN we are doing in trying to address all these challenges.
talking about greenwashing. I was scared how you were going to introduce me for a second. Actually, so just in making my notes, it was great to hear the previous panelists in mentioning something. And Karen, you mentioned the policy framework, and I think that's an essential ingredient of how we're working together, how we're driving forward an investment in MBS. And we have that policy framework existing now at the MEA level. I think the ENACT initiative that you mentioned is really critical. But yeah, the initial concept of that initiative is about reporting on the progress of MBS across those conventions, driven by the success coming out of Glasgow and the links between nature and climate. But it's also critical that that's underpinned by action and the right levels of action. And I think one of the things we've been talking about the last couple of days, and one of the things that we need to do is be pushing much more, is about implementation at scale and moving beyond projects. And it's interesting to hear the concepts of risk, and I think that's a very appropriate use of risk. But as Fiona mentioned in the WEF report, that the risks that we presented to businesses, I think, is critical, the way the nature-based solutions can play a role in that. I'll be sort of very biased and sort of build on my experiences of involvement in forest landscape restoration and working in agriculture. And nature-based solutions present a great opportunity to reduce the risk to land systems and make them much more resilient to climate shocks, both in short term and long term. So is it flooding? Is it sort of soil erosion? By integrating nature-based solutions, you can reduce those risks. But also, we've done a lot of work on the report on business guidelines that was released yesterday on actually how that can also make economic sense as well, and really making sure. So when we talk about different types of investment, there's the corporate investment that is also essential, that we're looking at financing that. And to do that, we need to move beyond MBS projects and make sure that we're integrating MBS into our sectoral approaches, into our landscape approaches. And we talk a lot about, I think, nature is 30% of the solution. Well, it should be integrated in 30%. As you said, Karen, it's that trade-off. It's working with infrastructure. It's part of the green infrastructure. It's not an alternative. It needs to work together. So we need to move beyond that project and make sure we're using nature-based solutions for, sounds a bit stupid, for a solution, for what we're actually trying to address. What is the problem we're trying to address? So beyond going to scale is critical, but also going to scale at a level of quality. And as IUCN have been, obviously, we've worked heavily on the IUCN MBS standard that provides the framework for ensuring that it's a credible MBS and helping guide practitioners and policymakers in a process of understanding what is actually an MBS. It's not just choosing one of the 8 criteria, and that is critical to the next step. I talked about projects, but I think sort of the lead into that is one of the biggest threats to MBS that we have is and the concept of MBS is MBS and climate. Because we're seeing a lot of what people are terming MBS and for climate as basically carbon capture schemes, which in itself is fine, but obviously MBS, the 8 criteria, is trying to drive it to much better practice. And a natural climate solution, it isn't automatically a nature-based solution. It's using nature, but is it meeting all those criteria? Is it actually a credible nature-based solution? And there's, it can be, but it's got to meet the nature-based solution. So having that quality of assurance is critical. Then the other point towards success, I think, is Karen, again, you touched on it, and we talked a lot about it over the last couple of days, is inclusiveness. And there's inclusiveness in design and delivery of nature-based solutions. And particularly where you're looking to get on, when we're on the ground, we see 1.7% of climate finance getting to indigenous peoples and local communities. And we talk about 30% of the solution, but no, the money isn't getting there. And so when we're designing these projects, we need to make sure that we're going through clear stakeholder processes, integrating the local people for decision making, integrating so that they're actually helping with the design process. And finally, just I think it's also critical then to loop back round when we talk about projects. We're talking about scale of projects. That's just sort of getting a bigger scale of projects. It's also working at the landscape level. And understanding who pays for what. I think in a lot of these solutions, there's opportunities, again, just using my own personal bias around agriculture. You can use nature-based solutions on a farm, agroforestry techniques, but there's a standoff almost at the farm gate. Private sector pay on the farm, the public sector pay off the farm. Well, if you're looking at I forget the name that we learned today about wetland agriculture, but if you're looking at wetland agriculture, you have a lot of upstream is critical. So who starts with the whilst it's also essential for the business to understand they need those resources, but actually who's going to pay for what becomes a really important point of that inclusiveness of design, the quality of design, and then also the scale of design and working at landscape. So yes, I think, Karen, you covered a lot of the policy work, but the scale, the credibility of the intervention and inclusiveness are essential for a successful MBS.
Thank you so much, Chris, and thank you for summarizing those points. I want to use them for linking to our last panelist, last but not least. So I think it's very important to re-emphasize the assurance of the quality of nature-based solutions. We really need to be sure like what we are proposing as nature-based solutions is qualitative enough. And of course, inclusiveness, critical for making sure that we are implementing and designing successful nature-based solutions at the scale. Scale is a major challenge. But of course, also a mainstreaming nature-based solution, not only at the technical or on-ground level, but a mainstreaming at multiple levels, thus including policy. And talking about policy being one of the latest milestones on the Global Biodiversity Framework. And then I would like to hand over to you, Lisa, and to talk more about the role of biodiversity.
Thank you. So what Chris said, I would absolutely agree with, but I will also add to it.
Somebody's not going to
argue. I think just to start with, I think I've really seen in the last 5 years or so a real shift, I think, in just the framing of nature from just looking at the impacts of business on nature and seeing it as basically a pain and something that you just have to try and deal with and comply with regulation, to really understanding much more systematically the fact that we all depend on nature, that the economy and our lives and livelihoods and futures are really dependent on nature. And I think, one of the most recent pieces of evidence that really try and capture that and distill it is by PwC, which used the Encore tool, which looks at how you can better understand the changes in the environment and the impacts of those changes on the economy. So I think this is really helping to make the business case that it's not protecting nature is not something nice to have on the sidelines once you've done all your economic development. It's really an integral part of economic development, and that economic development cannot happen without nature. So the PwC research finds that more than half of the world's GDP is dependent either moderately or significantly on nature, because you could say that all GDP is dependent on nature, but the data shows at least half. The health of ecosystems and biodiversity has far-reaching implications for value chains of all companies, but the analysis shows the importance to 163 economic sectors that were analyzed, and that more than half of the market value of listed companies across 19 stock exchanges, that these stock exchanges and their value chains are really dependent on nature, and addressing this is important to sustaining our economy. So, I mean, that's just to put into context that the UNEP report, which shows the state of financing for nature, finds that net flows are 154 billion. For nature-based solutions. So that might sound like a lot, but in the context of the global economy, it's really a tiny amount. And I think it's been mentioned, it needs to more than double to 384 billion by 2025, and then to 484 billion by 2030. And that's an annual amount. So we really are just at the starting point of needing to scale this up. And I think with sufficient finance, nature-based solutions could really help to cost effectively reach climate goals, biodiversity goals, and of course, land restoration targets. And that's particularly if the interventions, if these investments are contributing to national biodiversity strategies and action plans, nationally determined contributions or climate goals, and also land degradation neutrality targets. So done well, it can really contribute to achieving the goals that society has set through governmental agreements, intergovernmental agreements. If we mobilize 11 trillion in assets in cumulative investment in nature-based solutions by 2050, then we could really stabilize the climate, achieve the biodiversity targets, stabilize biodiversity levels, and achieve land degradation neutrality. So strong action before 2030 is really paramount at this stage. It's also important to keep in mind that 3 of the 5 most effective strategies for cutting greenhouse gas emissions are nature-based solutions, from ecosystem protection, restoration, and improved farmland management. So I think you're all aware, I think, that many of the public budgets for nature conservation are chronically underfunded. Global domestic budgets for biodiversity conservation amount to about 76 billion. Compared to this, nature negative expenditures far outweigh investments in nature-based solutions. So government expenditure on harmful subsidies to fisheries, agriculture, and fossil fuels is around 500 billion to 1 trillion per year. That really puts into context the amount currently going into nature-based solutions. These flows really undermine the efforts to achieve critical environmental targets. And I think it's a hugely missed opportunity, because as the World Economic Forum also estimates that the nature positive policies by governments could attract more than 10 trillion in new annual business value and create 395 million jobs by 2030. So it's not a choice of either or, it really needs to be combined with economic activity. Policymakers and financial institutions and businesses are recognizing this and really just starting to come together systematically to scale up financing for nature-based solutions. Just to put into more perspective some of the numbers, the private sector investment in nature-based solutions is around 26 billion per year at the moment. And so it's a fraction of what's needed. So we really need to scale up impact investment and investment in sustainable supply chains. And we need to have much more innovation across national planning and private sector financing to eliminate deforestation, to halt biodiversity loss, to restore habitats, and to strengthen the well-being of local communities and the land rights of Indigenous peoples. Now, with that said, the Kunming-Montreal Global Biodiversity Framework, adopted by 196 parties to the Convention of Biological Diversity at the COP15 in 2022, is a major milestone in the global drive to halt and reverse biodiversity loss and to catalyze nature-based solutions. The GBF makes it very clear, a very strong call for closing the 200 billion a year financing gap for nature. It also makes a very clear call to financial institutions to act on nature as they have done on climate, but at a more accelerated rate. So to some of the specifics in the Global Biodiversity Framework that the financial sector can align with include Goal D, which calls for alignment of all financial flows, both public and private, with the intent of halting and reversing biodiversity loss. I can go through many more targets, I'll name just a few more, but target 14, 15, 19, and 8 are ones to look at in detail, because all of them ultimately call for the policies, regulations, enabling environment to enable the finance sector and real economy sectors to really align their activities across all sectors with the goals and targets of the Global Biodiversity Framework. Businesses and financial institutions have a major role to play, and one of the key elements is for them to monitor and assess and disclose the risks, dependencies, and impacts on biodiversity around operations and value chains and portfolios. They need to reduce negative impacts and increase positive impacts across financing. So this nature-based solutions, of course, are part of it, but this really needs to be across entire portfolios and not to continue with business as usual across the trillions of investment and then having nature-based solutions on the sidelines. It needs to be integral and alignment across portfolios. Nature-based solutions feature specifically in Target 8 of the Global Biodiversity Framework, which is really highlights how they can contribute to disaster risk reduction, to climate change mitigation, and to adaptation. So you can really expect as a follow-on to the framework as it's implemented for this to scale up significantly. But also, again, to put the numbers into context, the 26 billion from private sector finance, 400 trillion in global financial assets are currently in the economy. So this is not a significant amount when you put it into the context of the financial system. Private finances currently are predominantly negative for nature through the amplifying effects that financing has on the main drivers of biodiversity and ecosystem change. So land use change, climate change, pollution, natural resource use and exploitation. The current portfolios of financial institutions are contributing to these drivers in the real economy. So that also means that they have a significant role to play in helping to reverse those drivers and helping to transition the economy to where it needs to be to halt biodiversity loss and reverse it. So transforming financial flows to nature positive and aligning global public and private financial flows with the goals and the targets of the biodiversity framework requires ambitious science-based targets across economic sectors and enhanced disclosure and accountability. And of course, the financial sector cannot do this alone. We need the strong policy and regulatory environment to drive change in the real economy and enable these financial flows to accelerate. So UNIFEP Finance Initiative, we convene over 500 financial institutions around integrating sustainability into their businesses. And so we're helping to guide practical action that the financial sector can take. So for banks in particular, we're working with signatories to the Principles for Responsible Banking. And we'll be publishing a report on the 22nd of May, which sets out the implications of the Global Biodiversity Framework for banks and highlights some of the key steps that they can take to support and contribute to implementing the framework. So a couple of those I'll highlight now. So one is building critical capacity internally on nature and biodiversity and establishing ownership and an executive board level to shape governance and to drive the strategy of the financial institution. We know that already some banks have 3-4 biodiversity, nature-focused people within banks starting to build up the technical expertise and know-how so that this can be integrated into their systems. They can map and assess banks' exposure to the risks, dependencies, and impacts of nature, including priority sectors such as food and agriculture and mining. And the Task Force on Nature-related Financial Disclosures Framework, which has been mentioned and which will be the final version, will be released in September. It will be useful for financial institutions and others to begin to assess and disclose these risks, impacts, and dependencies. They can work towards science-based targets, portfolio-wide targets on nature, and we're also developing guidance for Principles for Responsible Banking signatories to align their portfolios with the goals and targets of the Global Biodiversity Framework. So of course, this is really complicated, but it's updated guidance to at least start to pin down the metrics, the indicators, the base, how you assess the baselines, and we're working with other partners in the space who are already starting to make progress in trying to break this down into how you actually go about it. So I think it's great that the conversation is moving on from why you need to do this to exactly how to do this. A key element for banks will also be developing the policies and strategies on biodiversity and drivers of biodiversity loss. So that includes sector-specific policies or exclusions where that's appropriate to address impacts such as deforestation through the companies that they're financing. Engaging clients in high-impact, high-dependency sectors on the nature transition planning will be important. And of course, ensuring that nature is reflected within net zero transition plans. We also published a paper for investors. I won't run through all of the recommendations, but you can read it online. It's on our website. And one of the things, of course, is that they can actively contribute to financing mechanisms for nature-based solutions, as well as aligning their portfolios. Similarly, for insurance, we'll publish a paper beyond that. There are many other things underway which will help to scale this up, but I think I'm out of time. Thanks.
Thank you, Lisa. I think no worries. It will be a space for putting all these different reports, documents, and so on. The Geneva Environment Network, when we will finish the event, you will see at the bottom resources, and then we can put everything, all the reports, the IB report that was just launched. Of course, congratulate as well about the State of Nature report that was launched last year, 2022, and all these new reports. So we will have space, and this information won't be lost. But I really like what you mentioned is we really need. Sometimes we talk and talk, but sometimes it's keep doing business as usual, maybe. But what is the narrative then? We really need to for transforming the financial growth, what Fiona was saying, like having more impact, to integrating, mainstreaming nature. But still, even though we are moving towards that, there is still underfunded efforts. So we really need to think about it. Where are the gaps? Where are the opportunities to make sure that we are making that impact? And with this, I would like to say thank you again to all the panelists. And also, it's not only about us speaking here, but also to open the floor to you if there is any question while we are, and thank you, Fiona, while we are waiting for some questions to come from the chat as well. So any question from the floor?
Hello.
Please, if you can introduce, say your name.
Thank you. Thomas Andersson, Sweden. So first, Lisa, thank you very much for stressing the importance of nature and how that's a remarkable platform for everything we're doing on this planet. And now it's in jeopardy. We had Fiona leaving here. She made also a very important observation about that the impact is lacking when it comes to a lot of the activity that's ongoing under the label of green investment and so forth. So something has to happen to bring us into impact. Now, we've had meetings here for a couple of days, organized and hosted by IUCN and the EU. And I met a lot of people here who I must say are doing very interesting, very impressive, very energetic work on the ground to try to create like literacy, financial literacy, and in other respects to mature projects on the ground out there in the wide world. There are a lot of really good efforts, and I really appreciate the people who are here and the dialogue that has been taking place. Now, those people, they know how difficult it is. The European Commission, with the support that they have, the remarkable support they have in Europe for nature-based solutions, are creating a lot more momentum than would otherwise be possible. We all know that. That's really to be applauded. But it's really difficult, it's really hard. And if you go beyond Europe out there, for instance, we are involved in planting trees on the ground in various countries in the Middle East and so forth. And getting a signature from government officials and so on to get this to happen is impossible. You just have to do it, and then it will happen. Now, so we are in a situation where a lot more must happen, and it's not about the money per se. We cannot count the impact in terms of how much is invested. It's really what's coming out of it. There need to be a reward for action and for impact. So now we're here because there is, partly at least, there is this report forthcoming from the European Investment Bank, and very interesting work is being presented. But wanted to hear from you, what can and what should the European Investment Bank do going forward to nudge the investment community, the corporations and so forth, to nudge them to be at least part of that movement where there is actually a real shift towards this impact, because as Karin said, we have no time and everything needs to happen. So I think the actors must come together, and those on the ground and the big institutions. So what can be done?
We will take this question for you guys, and there are a couple of questions coming in the chat to colleagues here on my right.
Okay, well, I'll be brief, and I'll try and illustrate it by, as I said, our market-based instrument, this pilot that was launched back in 2014. That actually, in the end, the strategy adopted for that facility was very much one of the first aggregation, trying to actually get a critical mass of sub-projects, which I think Chris said, let's move away from individual projects and try to do something on a landscape scale, on a bigger scale. That addresses one of the challenges of finance, of how to get your hands around something which is inherently small, which isn't terribly efficient for the financial sector to address. So the aggregation approach is important, and secondly, the mainstreaming important. I know the name has been bandied around, but half of the investments under the MCFF were actually linked operations with existing EIB bank clients, where it led to a different discussion, most notably in the water utility sector, water waste management sector, where the business model is so strategically tied to nature, and they fundamentally get the issue of water, for a better phrase, that it was able to embed, NBS components in larger investment programs. So the beauty of that is your counterpart has typically a creditworthy balance sheet. You have really good professional skills in terms of putting projects together. And also critically, they have a customer base where there's an ability and willingness to pay that little extra for their extra benefits. We've talked about the difficulty of assigning value to nature and generating reliable income streams on which to build a business plan. Well, in certain places, in the urban environment, I think it also exists, as I say, in the utility space, and it's really the water sector, and there's an opportunity there. Anyway, I realise there are questions for others, but we found that just doing standalone individual projects out there with a project developer that had an idea actually proved very, very, very challenging. And so, linking operation mainstreaming was, a more reliable way of getting to actually finance operation.
Thank you, Guy. I have two questions. So one will go for Karin first, and then for Chris, the second one. So for Karin is more related to key assets. So in your view, what are the key assets which can be achieved through the implementation of nature-based solutions, and how can investment in NBS be strengthened? And I will move to Chris.
Yeah, thank you for the question. And in a way, I can answer this very shortly. The key asset nature-based solutions is that they are scalable from national, rural, national, local, subnational, international, regional, on all levels. And it needs, as I said also in my short intervention, it needs really many people. It is a way implementing nature-based solution, is a way giving back purpose and hope and involving the people. I think it's the only one chance that we have. We need the people with us in order to get us out of the planetary emergency we are in. This cannot be done against the people, and people need to be involved in nature-based solutions. Is one, it's not the only one, but it's one very appealing one where we can actually also help people to reconnect to nature. That's also something, in particular, urban population have lost the touch to nature. Implementing nature-based solutions, we can bring back nature into our lives, which is also the motto of the EU's biodiversity strategy for 2030. Thank you.
Thanks, Karin. And now moving into more, this question is more into the uptake of nature-based solutions and successful implementation. So for Chris, what is required for successful uptake of nature-based solution that is sustainable at the long term? And please, colleagues here in the room, also think about your question if you have any from the panelists.
Yeah, thank you, Veronica, for that question. I think hearing from the panelists, I think we've heard a lot about policy, we heard a lot about moving to scale. We heard about the quality of delivery, the inclusiveness. I think as an addition, and just hearing some of this conversation is also understanding our capacity around the nature-based solutions, and the knowledge of what we're trying to deliver. And I think one of the things we've discussed the last couple of days is how you present nature-based solutions to different sectors, and making sure that it's clear what we're trying to achieve. As I said, it's not just picking one or two of the 8 criteria. And I think that's a lot in the language that we use. We shouldn't be, yes, there's in the criteria of nature-based solutions. One of the criteria is the net gain on biodiversity. But there's 7 other criteria. So there's conversations on impact from nature versus nature-based solutions. I think sometimes get a little bit blurred because we use so much and we understand what we're doing internally, but also perhaps externally that's easily to get confused. Is it an impact? A technology company is going to have a different footprint on nature and a different need and then also a different need for a nature-based solution if they need one at all. Whereas an agricultural or agribusiness is going to have an impact on nature, but nature-based solutions can be critical to its long-term resilience. So I think capacity and understanding the concepts and even finance and investment get used in between, and I'm sure it's in part of your daily remit of understanding how those two are differentiated. So capacity and really being clear on what we're trying to achieve in the different sectors, I think is critical for moving forward.
Thanks, Chris. Thanks so much. And just to see nowhere back, I don't know if we can see, there is also, while we are having the event, we are having an illustrator which is illustrating all the panel discussions. So at the end, we will have a summary. And for you, Lisa, I would like to take one, maybe it's a challenging one, also from the chat, is related to carbon markets. And the question is, if impact matter, wouldn't be seen even a slight impact from all the activity around carbon markets?
Thank you for the question. I have an answer. It's maybe not an exact answer to that question, but it's related. So I'll give this answer. It's actually around biodiversity credits, which obviously will look to learn from carbon markets. So at the moment, there's an initiative which is the Biodiversity Credits Alliance, which is currently co-facilitating UNDP. And this is going to engage stakeholders on setting norms for biodiversity credits, and it will be really around having high integrity biodiversity credits and nature markets. So that we'll work closely with stakeholders in the space, of course, and it'll really focus on defining and categorizing biodiversity credits, and identifying global biodiversity credit principles, co-developing digital project standards, and establishing a peer review mechanism for biodiversity credit methodologies. So not an exact answer to the question, but we're basically learning from the climate space, and we'll more watch the space.
Sure, please go ahead.
Yeah, I think also just while carbon markets have been raised, I also think perhaps elaborating on the greenwashing point. I think it's driving a lot of opportunity in nature-based solutions and a lot of financing, but it can't be a replacement. It's got to be addition. So we see this. We've heard the phrase "business as usual." We have to, if people are using nature-based solutions for climate solutions for carbon capture, it doesn't excuse their actual change in practices of what they have to do in reduction of emissions, etc. And I think that's when we talk about the wider concept. I think that's some of the messaging that we need to make sure that we're being consistently and getting across, that it's just not. It's got to be used in conjunction with reduction in emissions.
Definitely, and this is linked with also with Karen was mentioning during her intervention. Nature-based solutions is not the panacea. We really need to bring also complementary solutions to achieve all these challenges. I see there was someone in the room just in the back. If you could please introduce yourself and question.
Thanks, I'm Amitabh Sharkar from the Global Health Center, the Geneva Graduate Institute. Good evening. Thanks to the entire panel for a very enticing discussion. I just want to share that 2 of the recent study I finished, one on International Finance Corporation, IFC, and the other one is on the for the UNESCO in the Sundarbans of Bay of Bengal. Sundarbans is the world's largest mangrove forest. So, for the IFC, what we found actually, it is the ESG. So it is not only about the IFC, the other banks also, like all the development outcomes, these are pretty much rooted into the social contract of the society. Whereas actually the post-COVID, we are thinking, as leaders in the academy, we are thinking that what could be the new form of contract. And all the ESGs are mostly actually the code specifics. Be it some, okay, on some occasions they are building code, some occasion on the land code or even eviction and all this. In the Sundarbans, what we found actually that there is increasing number of cyclones in the recent past, of course, because of climate change and all. So invading of saline water, sea water into the farmland. So conversion of agricultural land into pisciculture, meaning the fishing activities. And of course, this is required. What would otherwise the distressed people would do? Now, there are also investments being made by various banks. Now, just think of that how the ecological destruction is happening, but at the same point of time, there are some development outcomes because it's a challenging situation. So what we are actually, I'm especially thinking for the past 4 or 5 months, and recently we made a submission, but not confirmed yet, about the new eco-social contract and how at the supranational level, while even the investment, we are thinking of that do we need to forge certain understanding where the theory would guide our programmatic action. So where we can balance the society as well as the nature. And I think this is the perfect framework pitch for that. So primarily probably this for Karen and Lizel, but maybe for the entire panel, just to think of. Thank you. Thank you all.
Thank you for your intervention. So maybe Karen and Lisa, and then I have another interesting one in the chat.
Here I can only thank you for this intervention, and I would really like to have this report, as you said. These are very interesting findings. But I think there's not much question. I think it's really self-telling what you said.
Thank you. Yes, of course, integrating social considerations, human rights into nature-based solutions and other environmental is critical. And we certainly are also looking at just transition for initially looking at focusing on climate and a just transition to the carbon economy in terms of jobs and communities. And of course, that will be equally applicable to the transition to a nature positive economy.
Yeah, just one word, though. It's not a choice. Inclusiveness is not a choice. It has to happen. So I think.
Then I have a next one. This is more on blockchain. I don't know who in the panel will be interested to take it. And of course, colleagues, you can jump in anytime. So the question is, what are the opportunities and challenges offered by the blockchain in the financing of MBS?
Haven't really reflected upon it. I don't know if UNEP's reports have touched upon this, but obviously, blockchain is potentially a very useful technology for certifying things, and that perhaps it has a role to play in what was mentioned before in the biodiversity framework initiative. But if you need standards methodologies and need a true global register of these assets, blockchain potentially could be a technological solution for that. But just standing back a second and looking at our experience on MBS, I think there are many other burning issues before introducing blockchain into this particular problem. Anyway, so I think potentially in terms of creating a global register of MBS, it could have a useful role.
Thank you, Guy. Not sure if anybody want to comment on this one, blockchain.
Definitely not an expert, but there's also a Sustainable Digital Finance Alliance, which is looking at the role of digitalization, technology, and sustainability in finance and other sectors. So if you want to see what they're looking at in blockchain, that's a good source.
I know there are very good examples on blockchain. There are different very successful initiatives as well in bringing blockchain into more, let's say, restoration type of project on the ground. But I would like to open the floor again for the last question, and then we will move. I will give you still a little bit of time to think about the takeaway message. Very powerful one, 10 seconds. Not like we say 60, but I will say 10, 20 max. So then it's a really powerful one. So I will give the floor to colleague here. If you can introduce yourself, please.
Sure, thank you. Thank you to all the panelists. I'm Jainan Malapit. I'm from IUCN. Actually, blockchain, so I come from a banking and tech background, and blockchain and sustainability is something that I will actually be exploring because it does have, I think, technology is very, very powerful, especially when it comes to data and the aggregation, but also for blockchain, it's about transparency also that it allows to understanding the flows of funds to an extent as well, but I think it's a very, very useful tool and something that should be explored. The question kind of, I guess, question part comment, kind of tying into Thomas's question and some of the things that have been mentioned by each of the panelists. You know, Fiona was talking about shareholder engagement. You know, Karen's mentioned, you know, we don't want business as usual as well. Chris has reiterated that and so on. And I think when it comes to shareholder engagement, it's very, very powerful and very important part of addressing a lot of those concerns, especially when we talk about capacity and therefore value chains. So it's not just about the projects that we work on the ground in Africa and so on, but it's actually really from a corporate perspective, really, really integral. So I'm just curious, kind of from a more kind of, I guess, the discussions that Liesel and Guy are more exposed to with the finance and banking sector, how is that kind of addressed? Because I think that's also really, really key. Because currently we see a lot of the financial players, they do engagements, but it's not how it really should be. And you know, you have companies like Share Action that track actually what the talk is versus what the actual action is. So how is that discussion being addressed, if at all?
Thanks. So in terms of shareholder engagement, so it's particularly the Principles for Responsible Investment with its, I think, over 4,000 or 5,000 institutional investors works on collective engagement. And so through that you can read the reports of the investors on how they're undertaking engagement. The work we're involved in that space is really through the Net Zero Asset Owner Alliance, where the members of the alliance, I think it's around 11 trillion now in assets committed to net zero from asset owners. Achieving those targets is, of course, through their clients, including engagement with their clients on their transition plans. And so you can read some of the progress report and some of the work they're doing and what are they setting out the expectations of specific sectors. So it's definitely progressing and becoming much more granular and more specific about the asks of companies.
Thank you, Liesel, for jumping in. We have still 5 minutes.
So at least we've got more than 10 seconds.
No, because I have also to give the concluding remarks, if I may. So I would like, we have Liesel just respond to this question. And I think you have a lot of questions today. And again, congratulations for the report, which will be launched on the 7th of June, 8th of June. I'm not sure. In Brussels, it will be during the NetworkNature annual event. So you are more than welcome to join, whether it's online or no online, well, in person. So you don't have the choice. You will need to be in Brussels if you want to meet again with Guy. So, Karin, I would like to start with you with your powerful message.
Thank you. I claim we know what needs to be done. We have means, instruments, mechanisms, tools, the financial human resources. The question is, will we manage to do what needs to be done in the short time available? This decade is the ultimate test whether we deserve the name we have attributed to ourselves, Homo sapiens sapiens, or not.
Wonderful, powerful message. Liesel.
Thank you. we're just at the beginning of a journey which really, this is a critical stage for us, and we all know about the extinction crisis, the severe land degradation globally, and of course the climate crisis. So now is the time to invest. Now is the time to really get down to solving some of the challenges of nature-based solutions and aligning the whole economy with nature positive outcomes. There's growing interest in debt for nature swaps, sustainability-linked loans and bonds with nature KPIs, and also market-based financing schemes for sustainable land use. So a lot happening in the space. And if you're all involved and helping to solve some of the problems, then hopefully we can accelerate it more. The main message is really it needs to be alignment of entire portfolios and public and finance systems for us to really protect biodiversity. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Alignment, very necessary to have this alignment.
Yes. I think fundamentally it's one appealing to the streamlined coordination of grant resources that have been so key to get us up to this point with the mainstream financial sector. So that's extremely important. And finally, that it truly does need a full spectrum of financial instruments from the seed phase all the way through to more mainstream focused instruments for the corporate sector and the banking sector. But my true hope is that the nature agenda can very much follow behind the climate agenda and build that critical mass.
Thanks. And last, Chris, I didn't want to give you the IUCN privilege.
Okay. Well, I would just say one thing is that, oh, sorry. I would just say one thing is we talked a lot about the funding gap. And we hear a lot about the funding gap, but I wouldn't let the funding gap mask the opportunity. Because as Lisa, you mentioned, the repurposing and redirecting of the trillions is just as big as opportunity as making new financial flows. If we redirect those in the right way and for the right purpose, using nature as a solution, using nature-based solutions, then it's a twist to change the direction thinking about our economic model.
Thank you, Chris. I think at the end, you all five, you have come with a quite aligned message as well. The message has been like, we have to work together, we have to join the forces. And I have a few points that I would like to mention that I feel like they have been like really part of the different discourse that you have brought today. So first of all, we need to increase visibility and dissemination of nature-based solutions within the private sector. We have seen only 3% of the funding comes from the private sector. Alignment and identification of risk. We are moving forward very fast, but we really need to identify what are the risks, right? Then going from pilots to scale, we have been saying that we have to move beyond projectized type of strategies to really work at a scale. So then it will only be the way to ensure larger type of investment. And again, joining forces, coming with partnerships. There are so many partnerships outside. We have just mentioned ENACT. And this is one of the major efforts we are doing so far, but they are all the many partnerships, but we really need to keep working together and break these silos. We are very comfortable in our silos, but we really need to move forward. And then the action has to be taken now. Tomorrow, maybe it will be too late. And then blended finance is one of the key mechanisms to unlocking investment on nature-based solutions, for sure. Then we have also to ensure maintenance and scalability. We need to work at scale. And then metrics and indicators. These also we have to put in place. What are the KPIs? What are the metrics and the indicators that are measuring our impact? But for this, we also need to have mechanisms that ensure the quality, assurance and quality. And last point I would like to mention is the importance of creating incentives and avoiding greenwashing. And of course, to put in place nature-based solutions that are inclusive for all, but also that are really inclusive and protecting, conserving, and sustainable managing nature and ecosystems. So with this, I would just like to say thank you so much to all of you that are here today with us. Thank you to the panel for being as well, for accepting the invitation, and of course, thank you for the all the audience online, and of course also to the Geneva Environment Network for once again coming with IUCN together in this promotion of nature-based solutions. So with this, I would not know if we can see in the screen the final in the TV.
Yes.
Okay. Okay, so you can see while we were discussing, when we were collecting your questions, we have the illustrator who has been putting all of this as a summary. And thank you so much to the illustrator, to Joyce, who is online with us. Thank you so much to her. And now I invite you all to join the reception, because it's not everything about talking, but also about enjoying, and you have more time to network and to discuss on nature-based solutions. So thank you so much.
Got a job now, so like.